Let me guess why you're here. Maybe he said something that made your stomach drop. Maybe you found something in his search history, or maybe during a vulnerable conversation, he confessed to a fantasy that included words like force or taken, or even the word that makes everyone uncomfortable, ravishment. And suddenly, the man you thought you knew feels like a stranger. Your mind is racing with questions. Does this mean he's dangerous? Does he actually want to hurt me? What does this say about him or about us? Take a breath, because I'm about to walk you through something that sounds terrifying on the surface, but is actually one of the most misunderstood aspects of human psychology and desire. What you're about to learn will not only calm your fears, but might actually bring you closer to understanding the man in your life on a level most couples never reach. This isn't about violence, it's not about disrespect, and it's definitely not what you think it is. Stay with me because by the end of this video, you're going to understand the psychology behind primal desire, and more importantly, you're going to know exactly how to navigate it with confidence, safety, and power. Before we go any further, we need to establish one critical distinction. We are not talking about assault. We are not talking about actual violence or non-consent. Those are crimes, and they have absolutely nothing to do with what we're discussing here. What we're exploring is something called consensual non-consent, or CNC, which exists entirely within the realm of fantasy and carefully negotiated adult role play. Here's the most important thing to understand right now. When a man shares this fantasy with you, he's not confessing a desire to harm you. In fact, it's often the opposite. He's revealing a fantasy where his desire for you is so overwhelming, so all-consuming, that he imagines a scenario where restraint becomes impossible. It's a fantasy about being so attracted to you that civilized behavior temporarily dissolves. This fantasy lives in the same psychological space as romance novels where the billionaire can't help himself or the vampire claims his mate. It's about intensity, desire, and the intoxicating loss of control that happens when attraction becomes overwhelming. Understanding this distinction is the foundation for everything else we're about to discuss, so keep that frame in your mind as we move forward. To understand why this fantasy exists, you need to understand what it's like to be a man navigating modern society. From the time boys are young, they receive constant messages about restraint. Don't be too loud. Don't be too aggressive. Control your strength. Be gentle. Be careful. Ask permission. Read signals. Never make anyone uncomfortable. And these are good messages, necessary messages, but they create a psychological reality where men spend every waking moment managing, suppressing, and controlling their primal instincts. At work, he has to be measured and professional. With friends, he maintains social boundaries. Even in his relationship with you, he's constantly monitoring himself. Is this touch okay? Is this too much? Am I being respectful? The mental load of constant self-regulation is exhausting, and it creates what psychologists call shadow desires, the parts of ourselves we keep hidden because they don't fit the acceptable social script. This fantasy represents a psychological escape valve. It's a mental space where all those brakes come off for just a moment, where he doesn't have to worry about being too much or too intense or too rough, where his desire can exist at full volume without apology or restraint. It's not that he actually wants to hurt anyone or ignore real boundaries. It's that he craves a moment where the constant self-monitoring stops and raw, primal desire is allowed to exist. Think about it this way. If you spend every single day being told to whisper, eventually you're going to fantasize about screaming. That doesn't mean you actually want to disturb the peace. It means you're human. And sometimes the parts of ourselves we suppress the most become the parts that show up most intensely in our fantasy lives. This fantasy is his psychological scream, a release of all that pent-up restraint in a safe, imaginary space where no one actually gets hurt. Here's where this gets really interesting and where you might start seeing this fantasy in a completely different light. At its core, this isn't a fantasy about him overpowering you because you're weak. It's a fantasy about you being so irresistibly powerful that you break through every wall of self-control he's built. In his imagination, you're not a victim. You're a force of nature. You're so attractive, so magnetic, so intoxicating that his civilized mind simply cannot maintain its usual control. The fantasy narrative is essentially, she is so desirable that I literally cannot help myself. That's not an insult to you, that's the highest compliment his psychology knows how to give. Think about the language that surrounds intense attraction. We talk about being swept away by passion. We describe desire as something that overcomes us. We say someone took our breath away or that we lost ourselves in the moment. All of this language acknowledges that peak desire involves a loss of control, a dissolution of the careful boundaries we normally maintain. His fantasy is taking that metaphor and amplifying it to its most extreme expression. It's saying, my desire for you is so powerful that it overwhelms everything else. In a strange way, it's about your power over him, not his power over you. You've become the irresistible force that breaks through his carefully maintained control. This doesn't mean the fantasy is actually about mutual desire or romance in the traditional sense. The psychological appeal is specifically about that moment of lost control, that instant where restraint becomes impossible. But understanding the emotional truth underneath the fantasy, that it's rooted in overwhelming attraction rather than contempt or violence, completely changes how we interpret what's really being expressed. He's not fantasizing about hurting you. He's fantasizing about wanting you so intensely that nothing else matters. That distinction is everything. Let's get specific about what's actually happening in this fantasy, because the details matter tremendously. When most men describe this fantasy in detail, they're not describing torture or genuine suffering. They're describing struggle and surrender. They're describing the feeling of being powerful enough to take what they want while knowing on some level that what they're taking is actually being given. The appeal isn't about causing pain or fear, it's about the physical expression of dominance and the psychological thrill of seeing surrender. It's about the struggle, the push and pull, the resistance that makes the eventual yielding feel earned and powerful. It's about feeling strong, capable, and masculine in the most primal sense of those words. Think about the specific elements that usually appear in these fantasies: pinning hands above the head, holding someone in place, the physical struggle of resistance, the verbal back and forth of no and persistence. None of these elements are actually about inflicting harm. They're about the dance of power, the demonstration of strength, the testing of wills, the eventual surrender that says you win. What he's really seeking is the feeling of being so desired by you that you create a scenario where he can express his strength and dominance without the usual social consequences. He wants to feel powerful and masculine and in control, but he wants those feelings in the context of mutual desire, not actual violation. The fantasy allows him to explore those feelings without the moral weight of actual transgression. This is why communication about the specific details matters so much. When you ask him what specifically appeals to him about this fantasy, you'll often find its very particular elements: the physical restraint, the verbal resistance, the moment of surrender, rather than any desire for actual suffering or fear. Understanding these specific elements helps you see that the fantasy is about a psychological and physical dynamic, not about causing genuine harm. Here's something fascinating that connects to female psychology as well. This fantasy often includes an element of freedom from responsibility that can be incredibly appealing to both partners. Let me explain what I mean. In daily life, especially for women, there's an enormous mental load. You're making decisions constantly: what to wear, what to eat, how to respond, whether you look okay, whether you're doing enough, whether you're being too much. During intimate moments, that mental load often continues. Am I moving right? Do I look good from this angle? Should I be doing something different? The constant self-monitoring never stops. In the psychological space of this fantasy, all of that disappears. The submissive partner, the one being taken, doesn't have to decide anything, doesn't have to perform or worry about performance, doesn't have to think about angles or sounds or whether they're doing it right. They just have to be. They just have to experience. All responsibility for what's happening transfers to the dominant partner. For him, part of the appeal is providing that space of total mental freedom. He enjoys the idea that he can create an experience where you don't have to think, plan, or perform. You can just surrender to sensation and feeling without any of the usual mental chatter. He gets to be the one who takes all the responsibility, makes all the decisions, and creates all the structure. This is actually one reason why this dynamic can be surprisingly appealing to high-achieving decision-making women. When you spend your entire day being in control, being responsible, being the one who manages everything, there can be profound relief in a space where someone else takes all of that weight, even temporarily. Understanding this element helps explain why the fantasy isn't actually about disrespecting you or reducing your power. It's often about giving you a space where you can experience a different kind of freedom, freedom from the constant responsibility of managing yourself and the interaction. Now let's talk about something that might surprise you. This fantasy isn't exclusively male. In fact, ravishment fantasies are incredibly common among women, though we often don't talk about them openly because they feel politically incorrect or shameful. Think about the most popular romance novels and media consumed by women. How many feature the powerful billionaire who can't control himself around the heroine? How many vampire or werewolf stories involve the supernatural being who claims his mate because his desire is too strong to resist? How many historical romances feature the rake or pirate who takes the proper lady? These narratives are wildly popular precisely because they tap into the same psychological territory. The appeal is being so desirable that someone loses control. It's being wanted so intensely that social rules dissolve. It's the validation of being irresistible without having to take responsibility for the sexual encounter. Research on female fantasy consistently shows that ravishment scenarios rank among the most common fantasies women report. The psychological appeal is similar. In the fantasy, you're so attractive that restraint becomes impossible, but you don't have to be the one who initiates or takes responsibility for the encounter. You get to be desired intensely while remaining innocent of actively seeking the interaction. Understanding that women often share versions of this fantasy helps remove some of the fear and judgment around it. This isn't about one gender being wrong or dark. It's about humans having complex psychological relationships with power, desire, control, and surrender. When both partners can acknowledge that these fantasies exist in some form for many people, it becomes less scary and more like a shared aspect of human psychology that you can explore together if you choose. Here's something absolutely crucial that we need to establish clearly. Understanding why he has this fantasy does not obligate you to participate in it. Let me say that again louder for the people in the back. Understanding does not equal obligation. You can completely understand the psychology, see where it comes from, recognize that it's not about actual violence, and still decide that this isn't something you want to explore. And that is absolutely completely 100% okay. Your boundaries are valid regardless of the reasoning behind his fantasy. Some fantasies are meant to stay fantasies. Some things are hot to think about but not hot to actually do. Some psychological territories are interesting to understand but not comfortable to inhabit. All of that is perfectly normal and healthy. If this fantasy makes you uncomfortable, if it triggers past trauma, if it simply doesn't appeal to you, you have every right to say, I understand this about you, but it's not something I want to act on. A partner who truly cares about you will respect that boundary without pressure or resentment. On the other hand, if you find yourself curious, if elements of it appeal to you, if you want to explore this territory carefully and consensually, that's also completely valid. There's no shame in being interested in power dynamics or primal play within a safe, consensual context. The key is that this is your choice. You get to decide what you're comfortable with, what boundaries you want to maintain, and how far you're willing to explore. Understanding his psychology gives you information and power, but it doesn't take away your right to your own boundaries and comfort. Whatever you decide, make sure it's genuinely what you want, not what you feel pressured to accept. If you've decided you're open to exploring this territory, the first and most important step happens fully clothed, in broad daylight, probably over coffee or during a calm evening conversation. This is not something you figure out in the heat of the moment. This requires explicit, detailed negotiation beforehand. Start by asking him to get specific about what appeals to him. Not just, I like the idea of being dominant, but actual details. What specific actions? What specific words? Is it about physical restraint, verbal resistance, a particular scenario or setting? The more specific you can get, the better you'll understand what you're actually agreeing to. Ask him what he absolutely doesn't want. Are there words that would ruin it? Actions that would feel wrong? Understanding the boundaries of the fantasy is just as important as understanding the fantasy itself. Share your own boundaries clearly. What are you absolutely not comfortable with? What might you be willing to try? What would you need to feel safe? This isn't about ruining the mood or being too clinical. This is about creating a foundation of trust that makes the fantasy possible in the first place. Consider writing things down. It might feel awkward, but having a clear agreement about what's on the table and what's off limits prevents misunderstandings later. You can discuss the specific scenario, the signals you'll use, and the aftercare you'll need. This negotiation phase is where you build the container that makes the fantasy safe to explore. The absolute cornerstone of consensual non-consent play is the safe word system. In regular intimate encounters, no means no and stop means stop. But in CNC scenarios, those words might be part of the role play, so you need a completely different word that means stop everything immediately, we're done, return to reality right now. The most common system is the traffic light method. Green means I'm good, keep going. Yellow means I'm approaching my limit, slow down or check in with me. Red means stop everything immediately. These words are never part of the scene. They're your emergency brake, and both partners need to respect them absolutely. Choose your safe word before you begin, and make sure it's something you can remember even when you're emotional or overwhelmed. Some people use red or safe word itself. Others choose random words like banana or Oklahoma that would never come up naturally. What matters is that you both know it and both commit to respecting it immediately. Practice using it. Seriously. During a normal day, randomly say your safe word and have him immediately stop whatever he's doing and check in with you. This builds the muscle memory so that in an actual scene, you'll use it if you need it and he'll respond instantly. The safe word is what transforms this from actual assault into consensual play. It's the difference between violation and exploration. Without it, you should not attempt any form of CNC play. With it, you have the power to explore safely while knowing you can stop everything the instant you need to. If you're interested in exploring this territory but the full fantasy feels too intense, there are many ways to incorporate elements of primal or dominant energy without going to the extreme. Think of this as testing the waters before diving into the deep end. Start with something as simple as pinning wrists. During a normal intimate moment, have him hold your wrists above your head or pin them to the bed. This introduces the physical restraint element in a controlled, gentle way. You can gauge how it feels for both of you without any of the more intense psychological elements. Try slightly rougher verbal cues. Instead of asking permission for everything, he can tell you what he wants. Turn over instead of, would you like to turn over? Come here instead of, can you come closer? This introduces a command dynamic without anything that feels aggressive or scary. Experiment with play wrestling where he wins. This can be surprisingly fun and introduces the physical struggle element in a lighthearted way. You resist, he overcomes your resistance, and you both get to feel the push and pull of that dynamic without any of the darker psychological framing. Consider adding elements like holding you firmly in place during intimacy, using a more commanding tone of voice, or incorporating language about how much he wants you and how hard it is to control himself. These baby steps let you explore the energy of dominance and primal desire without the more intense psychological elements of the full fantasy. Pay attention to what feels good and what doesn't. This is exploration, not performance. If something feels wrong or uncomfortable, that's valuable information. If something unexpectedly appeals to you, that's also valuable information. Let your genuine responses guide how far you want to take this exploration. After any kind of intense, intimate experience, especially one involving power dynamics or primal energy, there's a crucial phase called aftercare. This is when you both return from the fantasy space to your normal relationship dynamic, and it's absolutely essential for emotional health and relationship stability. Aftercare means different things for different people, but it generally involves reconnecting gently after intensity. This might mean cuddling quietly, having a warm blanket nearby, drinking water together, or simply lying close and breathing together. The physical closeness helps your nervous systems regulate after the heightened arousal and intensity. It also means verbal reassurance. After playing with power dynamics, it's important to explicitly return to equality and mutual respect. Say things like, I love you, that was just play, you're safe, I respect you completely. These verbal affirmations separate the fantasy character from the real person and the real relationship. Some people experience what's called drop after intense scenes, a sudden dip in mood or energy as the adrenaline and endorphins wear off. This is completely normal and not a sign that something went wrong. Having a plan for aftercare helps manage this drop. Know that you might feel vulnerable, emotional, or even sad afterward, and that's okay. That's your body processing intense experience. Aftercare is also when you debrief. What felt good? What didn't? What would you want to do differently next time? This isn't criticism, it's calibration. You're learning together what works for both of you, and that requires honest communication after the experience, not just before. Never skip aftercare. It's not optional or unnecessary. It's the bridge that allows you to explore intense territory while maintaining the safety and love of your actual relationship. It's what makes the difference between healthy exploration and potentially harmful experience. We've covered a lot of psychological territory together, and if your head is spinning a little, that's completely normal. Understanding primal desire and consensual non-consent requires holding multiple truths at once. That fantasies can be intense without being dangerous, that understanding doesn't equal obligation, that exploration requires careful negotiation and safety measures. The most important thing to take away from this video is that knowledge is power. Understanding why this fantasy exists, what psychological needs it serves, and what it actually means gives you the power to make informed decisions about your own boundaries and comfort. You're not navigating this in the dark anymore. If your partner has shared this fantasy with you, recognize that he's trusted you with something vulnerable. Whether you choose to explore it or not, that trust deserves acknowledgement. The darkest fantasies often require the deepest trust to share. Remember that you are always in control of your own intimacy. You get to decide what boundaries you maintain, what territories you explore, and what feels right for you. Understanding his psychology doesn't change your right to your own boundaries. Use this knowledge to feel empowered, informed, and confident in whatever decisions you make about your intimate life. You've got this.